What does it take to be a successful entrepreneur? A dangerous amount of coffee and a ton of grit. My name is Jason Tracy, and every week I interview business leaders to share their stories, life lessons, failures, and advice with you. Welcome to Coffee and Grit. What is up? Welcome back to another episode of Coffee and Grit, and I've been looking forward to this one for a long time. I have the author of The Legend of Doc Ping in the studio today, and Doc Ping has been kind of a legend to me. It was really cool when we got connected because I've seen him in my retail locations for a while. I've heard and I've had some conversation with him, and it's been a legend. And I got to read his book over this last week, and just incredible stories. I always say I have difference makers in the studio, but Doc Ping is a real face eater, and I know he knows. I has no idea what that means, so I hope he's not offended offended by that. But what it is like, there are so many stories I listen. I talked about the episode last week. I just finished the book The Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, and so when the next book I read was The Legend of Doc Ping, and it was like every experience, good, bad, and different, near death, just some incredible experiences have led this man to where he's at now, and it's just a true, I guess, testimony of integrity, mindset, and just hard work will get you places. And so I'm so incredibly excited to talk to that, because I got the man, the legend, but not the myth, because he's in the studio right now. So Doc Ping, welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much.
I'm so honored to have you in, and excited to talk about your story.
I'm very honored, number one, to be here, and I just want to say thank you. And I hope the people that's out there listening will enjoy as much as how you're gonna interview everything.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things of listening to your story, and I guess the first thing I think of is there are so many people that would encounter, I guess just start from the beginning, growing up in China and when you come through, because I've read the book. I want the audience to understand in that setting, what you came from.
Well, when I was little, my dad was escaping from the Red Chinese at the time, and we were literally on two jackasses that my sister was on one side, I was on the other side, and my grandfather and my mom and dad, we were escaping from China, leaving China by foot, and crossing the mountains. I can remember going through a river, and it was quite rapid. And I remember them worrying about one of us getting swept away, and also my dad saw on a road there on our bellies, and went down there and saw this Red Chinese with this star. It made such an impression on me that, not realizing 17 years later, when I'm 20 years old in Vietnam, when we had the Tet Offensive in '69, and there was close to 1,000 of them Viet Congs coming through Happy Valley, and we had to have body counts to, every other day. And then we went out there, and here was this Chinese with his belt buckle laying in front of me, and I looked down there. I wish I would have brought it back and gave it to my dad, but it when I saw that star, I could not believe that, over 20 years, that star made an impression in my mind that I never thought about until I encountered that situation.
It's so crazy how our experiences, something like that from being so little, was so impressionable.
Absolutely. And those are mind-boggling. That you wonder why a child remembers so much. Well, those things alter one's personality, one's thinking, how you're going to wake up. And there were times when I first came to the United States, it was so difficult because I had nightmares from back then, and, thinking that people are going to hurt you in many different ways. And so coming from China to Bangkok, Thailand, with my mom and dad and my sister, and because my dad was it would be like a General Eisenhower who was in the back controlling everything, whereas Patton was out there fighting the battle. My dad was one of those, so we were able to be with in Bangkok, Thailand, and be living in beautiful homes next to the University of Siam, Bangkok, Siam, and now it's Thailand, and where I literally was with a bunch of kids building a boat, and literally I could not swim, but I knew that I had to sink with the ship. So the rest of the boys went home, and my dad asked where I was, and they said he's back in the pond. Well, I was literally back in the pond, and that's how I came to the United States. Because when I drowned, a lady that happened to be there at the university, going to classes and doing exchange work, went the wrong day and saw a bunch of Thai people gathering around. So she wanted to see what was going on, and there I was. They were rolling me over a barrel, trying to get the water out of my system, and then her being a lifeguard gave me artificial respiration the old way, where they press down on you and pull your arms up. And after half an hour, she said, "I'm sorry, he's gone." Interesting enough that as I think back, I knew no words of English, but I understood when she said he's dead. And I find that very interesting.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting. Like as I was hearing that, and one, how the story twists from there with this particular lady, but two, in you having that death experience, what kind of gifts you got out of that?
When now with modernization, you see on TV they talk about a bright light. Well, I actually had the bright light come into my face because I remember I must have been awful cold, my body, because when my tear ducts started to run, it was warm. I can still remember that, and this has been many years ago. And then my dad and Mrs. Walsh stayed in communication, and I can remember due to that water that I was drinking and literally going into my system, I had to go to the hospital because both my kidneys were failing. And Lord and behold, there was a miracle drug called penicillin, and I was one of the first that they tried it on, and it worked. And I came out of the hospital, and knock on wood, both kidneys are still functioning very, very well. And from Bangkok, Thailand, I ended up, we moved to Taiwan. My dad was commissioned as a 3-star general, and I remember because he had his own driver, and we had our own little home. And although it was a third floor, but it was still a home. And not knowing, this is interesting, I wanted to see this movie. Like all children, even adults, like scary pictures.
Yeah.
Well, this lady was going to turn into a snake, and I wanted to see this movie. I go to the movie theater with my uncle for my birthday, and about halfway through the movie, I got rowdy. I was crying. I was yelling. I didn't want to be there anymore. And my uncle said, "Boy, you are just a spoiled little brat." So he said, "Okay," and everybody's yelling, "Get this kid out of here. Get this kid." So he said, "Now what do you want to do now that we left the movie? You've been wanting to see this movie. Now you wanted to leave." Well, I love beef and noodle soup. So we stop at this little, cart area. They make homemade soup, and I got that. And we were walking back, and all of a sudden, my mom's running down the street. My uncle said, "What's wrong? What's up?" He goes, "Oh, my God, you're alive." He goes, "Well, why wouldn't we be?" But the theater that we were at got blown up. Everybody got killed in there. But not knowing that we left, we survived. And he says, "Well, since we're here, right across the street is a temple. If you go into an Asian temple, either in China or even some certain temple, maybe even in Bangkok, Thailand, they have a big bamboo. In it would look like little sticks. But every one of these little sticks have a carving. And you shake it, and you keep shaking it, and one of them work its way up to the top. And you grab that one, and then you walk around the whole temple, and you'll find the piece of paper that's related to this stick that came up. And my uncle got it, read it, goes, see this? That's why you don't ever pay attention to this. He says, you're going to be going on a long, far trip overseas. He says, you're not going anywhere, so don't worry about it. And my uncle said, it says you're going on a long journey overseas. He says, that's ridiculous. He says, you're not going anywhere. Well, little did we know that my dad and Mrs. Walsh were in communication, because in China, if somebody saves your life, they are literally your legal guardian. So she asked if I would like to come to the United States and live. And my dad, with everything that was going on, like right now, China expanding and wanting to go to constantly, Quemoy and Matsu, they were bombing daily. And but the island of Taiwan was the only safe island, the major island. But the little ones were getting heavily bombarded. And my dad thought, for the safety of me, yes, we would like to send him over to the United States. And that's how I came over to the United States. And
how old were you at this point?
At 9 going on 10. And I was just he put me on a boat because that's probably what we could afford. And coming over here, had the experience of stopping in Japan, stopping in the Philippines. And Japan was so modernized back then that every little park, there was a TV outside in the park.
Wow. And
you could see, different things. And, being 9 years old, I was just blown away. I just couldn't believe it. But the very first port that we landed in United States was Portland, Oregon. And from there, Mrs. Walsh's brother, who was a colonel in the Army, I got to stay there for, a month or so before I was able to fly into St. Louis, Missouri. And there began a new adventure for me. From the age of 10 until I was 17, 18, I literally lived in 4 different foster homes. And being a child, you don't realize you're being abused. I just thought that was normal. She would make sure I get up in the morning and cook her breakfast. And if I didn't get up fast enough, she'd use a whip, told me to get downstairs, and I would cook her breakfast, make her breakfast, and I'd get ready and go to sell newspaper. And any money I made, of course, she would, I would give it to her. But I think I always made sure I kept a quarter or so, because back then it didn't cost very much to go to a movie. And I know that 25 cents got me into a movie. But I remember that one day as a freshman in high school, well, actually in 8th grade, I was taking off my shirt after gym class, and Coach Longworth, who was in the Navy, saw me in the shower. He came, he said, "Come here." He said, "Where'd you get all this on your back?" I said, "Oh, I fell in the bushes." I said, "I scratched myself." He goes, "Okay." Not knowing back then, he recorded everything and sent it to the social worker. Well, now if a teacher sent it to a social worker, within 24 hours, you get a response. Back then, it took almost 2 years. And so when I was a freshman in high school, Mrs. Sullivan, the social worker, came in our gym class. And they were repairing the boys' bathroom and what have you, and the shower room. And so we were out, all the locker rooms out there in the basketball court. And she walked right over to me and she goes, "How would you like to move?" I said, "Oh, yes, ma'am. I didn't even know what the hell she was talking about.
I'm in wherever we're going.
So she goes, well, we got to go back and pick up some clothes. I said, oh, no, never mind, don't. Because I was afraid of the consequences. And she looked right at me and she goes, she will never lay another hand on you. And then I moved in with Mrs. Clark. From there, that was a temporary, and they were trying to find me a place. And she contacted, social worker contacted different churches. And Frank W. Hutchinson, who played basketball at Ohio State, he was a minister at the Presbyterian Church, asked the congregation, and by then nobody wanted a 13, 14-year-old boy. And he said, I'm not old enough to be your dad, but I can be a big brother. And that's when he taught me how to drive a stick shift. And then from there, but when I did live with Mrs. Walsh, she was talking so much about this foster son that she had that the people in Wood River, I think, put her in the corner and said, well, let's find out who this boy is. Why don't you invite him over? And there's a job opening at Camp Piesaw in Grafton, Illinois for the YMCA, and he can work there. And he can, come in for an interview. Well, lo and behold, and she brought me over, and I did an interview, and they said, we'd love to have you. It's a YMCA counselor in training. And so she couldn't do anything because I got it. And so I ended up catching a bus, go over to Alton, and never forget that, and got to know these two young men, David and Bowen Ayers, ended up being like a foster brother. And Mrs. Ayers, during the camp, there's a 2-week break, and they asked me if I had anywhere to go. I said no. They go, well, why don't you stay at our house in a 2-week break? I said, oh, okay. So I'm sitting at the YMCA, and I remember Mrs. Ayers coming up and saying, I'm supposed to pick up a little Chinese boy. And she didn't drive, so we took a bus. And that was the beginning of that relationship. And when I end up getting married, they're the one that end up actually giving me away. And we still, David Ayers is still like a brother, of course, and we stay in touch. And not as much with Bowen, but I remember when Frank was moving, and he actually marched with Martin Luther King. And he was moving to Raleigh, North Carolina, to preach in an all-black congregation, and wanted to know if I wanted to go. Well, by that time, I'm going to be a senior in high school. Somehow, I got selected, nominated to be the captain of the wrestling team, and got it. And I didn't want to move again, so Mike Heffelin, who played baseball and football with me, said, Mom came up and says, how would he like to live with us going into senior year? And Frank said, that would be great. Well, long story short, I didn't even know it, but nobody else in the family knew it, but she already went to the courthouse and applied and did all the paperwork, so the transition was real easy.
Wow.
And I ended up going there. So Mom Heffelin took care of everything. And Mike and I, it's the book is written by Colin Heffelin, mm-hmm. which is his son. And Mike taught at the University of Missouri in journalism. So, and he wrote for Leatherneck magazine, which I appeared in at the first time before the book came out. But Mike tried to follow my footstep, and he became a helicopter pilot for the Marine Corps, and asked if he should volunteer to come to Vietnam. I said, no, only one of us need to be here. You don't need to be here. So he never had the tour to be there. But that's how fast advancing I ended up being in the United States and living in those foster homes. And but I think yes, I'm sure there are scars deep in there, but I try to overlook it, as much as I can.
Before we get back at it, a quick shout out for our sponsor, Playbook Builder, powered by AI. This show has always been about giving the resources and the tools to small business owners in order to grow and scale your businesses successfully. And so I'm so excited to partner with a company that does just that. If you've listened and heard any of our guests, you've heard talking about building process, developing and training, building culture, are all such important pieces in order to building a great company. Well, Playbook Builder, powered by AI, has come along and revolutionized the game on how you can do that for your team and people. Whether you're onboarding new people, training and developing, continued training and developing, you're looking to scale your business or eventually sell, or most importantly, you're looking to build a legacy as a visionary. Playbook Builder, powered by AI, is able to solve those problems for you. For me as a consultant, I've been able to plug in, and it's so amazing for what I do for clients. I can now leave a legacy. And so, for example, I'm next week training a new hire for a company, and I've been able to build out the next month of her training program using Playbook Builder, powered by AI. The cool thing about the AI, what does that do? What's the hardest part of building out a process? Taking the step by step and making it easy to learn. What the AI piece does is you can actually type in what process it is, whether you want to onboard, if you want to onboard a new employee, type in onboard a new employee and what type of industry you're in, and the AI will put together a foundation for you to build out your playbook. It is absolutely incredible. But don't take my word for it. Head on over to playbookbuilder.com, and these guys have set it up to where you can take this for a test run with no obligations. Plug in what kind of playbook you want to build. If it's a sales training playbook, for example, plug that in the description. And in the description, you can also put in what kind of industry you're in, and then hit generate, and it will generate a playbook for you. Impressed from there, and you can take a 30-day free trial of the playbook system altogether. The thing I keep thinking about is, through all the experiences you've had, there's so much violence, so much negativity, all those years living with Mrs. Walsh and in the abuse and how you were treated. We haven't even addressed the racism of coming from China, being Chinese, living in the United States during this 50s, 60s. How do you stay positive and keep a positive outlook?
It's interesting that you brought this question up because learning to survive, I think that was a major thing that came out of escaping from China, and being proud of who I am. Oh, I can remember I didn't understand anything about Little Rock, Arkansas, the riot, but I understood what slant eye, a chink, understood all that. I remember at a wrestling match against, I think was not Ledoux, but something with Lindbergh, and I came up to wrestle in the 147 weight class, and the whole stand was saying chop suey, chink and blah blah blah, and the whole stand, and so that brought out something in me, and I didn't realize I was wrestling the captain of the team, and I just refused to pin him. I remember scraping his head on the mat, giving him mat burn, and I think I beat him like 18-2 or something. And after the match was over, he came over and sat by me. He says, "You were the strongest guy I have ever wrestled against." And I think it was my adrenaline that was flowing, whatnot. I wasn't that strong, but he said, "Nobody's ever beat me this bad." He says, "But I wanted to tell you," he says, "I apologize for the stands, those idiots out there." And I said, "Thank you." And I remember that. And then when I went in the Marine Corps, another survival mood, I was the crazy Chinaman. I'll never forget the one time we were, everybody had mess duty, and we were in charge of following up. I was in charge of the washing, had to put the silverware through this, machine, and the plates and everything like that. Well, this another section, they would clean the silverware and bring it to you. Well, they kept making it, instead of stacking it properly, it would fall over, and we would all have to do it again. And then you only had so much time to when you're doing mess hall duty, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of Marines going in there eating and coming out, and they had to have clean utensils. And I remember this guy from California. I said, listen, you guys going to have to really stack these better. He says, and if we don't, what are you going to do about it? I said, well, you'll find out. Well, next thing I know, confrontation came about, and he was in charge of that group, and I was in charge of our group. And I ended up literally, he didn't realize I wrestled in high school, and he dove for my leg, and then I jumped back with my leg and pushed his head down on the ground. And next thing you know, I'm banging his head on the concrete floor. And when it was all over, Sunday we had the day that in the Marine Corps and boot camp is where you wash your clothes and write your letters home. And but now, you got to remember, for 18 weeks you don't read. There's no news, so you don't have anything. So it's just you and the Marine Corps. And Valdez walked by and saw him and said something like, "What the hell happened to you?" And he said, "Sir, I fell over a Foot Locker." He said, "No, you didn't. You ran into that crazy Chinaman." And he did look like a raccoon because both of his eyes are black and blue. And that was one situation that I remember. And then they put me in charge of the Fat Boys Farm, where I had to literally get up at 3 a.m. and work with the overweight people. And then at 5 a.m, ran with the rest of the platoon. So we had double running. And, when you're in there among the forest, you don't really see the trees. And so it didn't to me like it was anything extra. But now that you look back.
Not when you say it out loud.
Absolutely. When so when you're in it, you don't realize the turmoil that was happening, and but you make it through, and that's why they wanted me to all the Marines in the platoon wanted me to become the number one guide guide for our platoon 152, and but he said this is not a democracy, this is a dictatorship. He says, I nominate Foster, and we didn't even know who in the hell Foster was. Well, Foster was in the boot camp with us because he already went through ROTC. So he was just going through boot camp, and then he would be commissioned. And he said, and Valdez says, he will be commissioned as the second lieutenant, and he says, he'll be my boss. And Ping, you're not going to be anything. So you're not going to get the PFC out of the boot camp. And that's what it's an automatic PFC, and which everybody strives for because that's your first rank. Then in the pugil stick fighting, this is something I think you would be interested in. Platoon 152 and 151. 152 is a process like a 64 basketball March Madness. You fought one guy and you won, you go to the winner bracket. You fight another guy and you go in the winner bracket. Well, before I knew it, I was the champ. And I thought, everybody was happy, And then I found out that we had to go against 151. Man, I'll never forget, this guy looked like Chisel, looked like a Greek statue. About 6'3", big, beautiful, black-looking man, just a beautiful body. I'll never forget that. And he came up, and I go, holy shit. Well, the first strike he hit me, he knocked me down. He knocked me down to the ground. But the only reason I survived that was because he hit me with the butt end. The red end is the bayonet side. The butt end is the butt where it knock you out, but it's not a kill. So meanwhile, I'm gathering my thoughts, and this guy and drill instructor says, the fight must continue until the blood end hits. Well, he come in now. He's coming full bore. As long as I live, I won't forget this. I somehow gather enough energy and strategy that I put the blood in right underneath his chin, and I can still see him falling backwards, just like something out of a cartoon. He flew backwards and landed on his back, and I could almost see the birds flying around his head. He was laying there. The reason why I brought this up was Barry Stokes, who I represent for the Detroit with the Detroit Lions, with the Green Bay Packers, with the Cleveland Browns, New York Giants, Miami Dolphins. Barry graduated from Eastern Michigan University. He ended up playing 15 years. It's an undrafted player, which is really unheard of.
It's unheard of.
And he went with my beautiful wife Beth. We went to Vegas, and we always drive to Hollywood Hills, where my mom and dad and my sister's buried, and put flowers there. In this trip, we made it to Bakersfield, California, where Jack Gee was went to boot camp with me, and somehow stayed in touch with me. And God bless him, he's passed away now. But the first time we went there, he looked at Barry and says, "Do you know who this crazy guy is you're with?" He said, he's the Pugo champion. He says, "I was able to sit there on the sideline and watch what he did." And Barry, I mean, I've totally forgotten about it, so I wasn't even thinking about it. But to him, that left an impression. And, it tells you how bad war was. Jack Gee was in artillery, which is actually 3,000 meters south of where we were at Happy Valley. We could hear the shelling going out, the 155, 175 howitzer going over. You could hear it and ricocheting around the mountain on 327. But he was just there as a young 19-year-old, and he says, this gunnery sergeant was telling us to make sure to be careful what to do, what not to do. And he said, we're all sitting there. All of a sudden, he said, I looked down, and his head was between my leg. And he said, for 50 years, he says, I've had the same nightmare every night. And because of the Agent Orange that was being poured down in Vietnam, killing all the forages and what have you, not knowing how it was going to affect the human being, he lost both legs and ended up losing both kidneys, but his son donated it and gave him a few more years left of his life. Mm-hmm. And, this is some of the sad things that came out of the Vietnam War.
Yeah. Yeah. Back then, they didn't even know how to even start to deal with that.
Sure. It's hard. I remember when my daughter Jessica finally talked me into going to the VA. I was fine with my paying for my own insurance and everything, and going through that process. And she said, "Dad, you've earned it. Go." And then so Michael Smith of the VA, he's a district superintendent in the Southeast Michigan. He got a hold of me and set me up, and so I ended up going to the VA, and the best move ever. They evaluated me psychologically and found out that I was a little goofy. They said, at that time we didn't know what PTSD was, and so because of that, I was able to get right now my medications taken care of and wonderful care, and ended up my son-in-law ended up being the chief of staff at the VA, and now he is been promoted and working out of Washington D.C.
Wow.
Yeah, so he's moving right up, Dr. Mark Hausman. Yeah,
that's incredible.
Yeah,
it's incredible you could go back and work through the PTSD. And I know you'd mentioned a part in the book about how your first marriage was difficult in the sense of going through the PTSD, and I was wondering if there was something there to help you get past that.
I don't think there's a doubt that when you go through a divorce, probably for me it was first a denial. I didn't think this could ever happen, and I didn't want it to happen. I did not want it to happen. I was doing everything I could to salvage the marriage. And then finally the attorney that I ended up having to hire said, you've given everything up. He says, let me do my job. I finally had to say, okay. Well, then once I said okay, within 2 weeks, I dragged it out for almost a year. And within 2 weeks, it was settled. And that's when I realized, working hard was probably one of my way of escaping. And but it also got us where the home that I'm living in still now. But when as you look back, when I came back, as an example, from Vietnam, when I attended Eastern Michigan University, here's something that may be unique for you. I was stationed in Yokosuka, Japan, where I met my first wife. The Marine Corps thought that I was potential an officer, so they sent me to school in Tokyo, and the university is called Sophia University in English, but in Japanese it's Gochi Daigako, and it's one of the most prestigious college in all Japan, in Tokyo. It's an extension of Maryland University.
Okay.
And I was studying history of Civ there when this two young lady approached Sergeant Dawson, and I said, we noticed you guys sitting in the front. Do you speak any English? I said, yes, ma'am. I said, can I help you? That's how our relationship got started. And that's how I ended up in Michigan. And now I'm in Vietnam, and I'll never forget this. I was being called into the officer's hut, and this major was sitting there and said to me, I'm a representative of Southern Cal. You have a full scholarship to go there, and you are able to participate in judo and football. And then I realized it was Coach Bob Windisch who did all this. I played football for Coach Windisch in Yokosuka, Japan. He asked me one day, he said, what in the heck are you doing? That's nice. What in the world are you doing in the Marine Corps? And I explained to him. That's when he realized it. He said, okay, I understand now. But he coached with the New York Giants and with Lombardi. And he said to me, he goes, you got to try to understand, I only been in the United States 9 years before I joined the Marine Corps. I didn't know, I played the sports, but I didn't know anybody, that was famous, including Lombardi. And he used to compare me. He said, you run a lot like Frank Gifford. And I had no idea who in the hell Frank Gifford was. And for the longest time, I thought he graduated from Notre Dame. Not until recently did I realize that Frank Gifford graduated from Southern Cal.
Wow.
And not realizing that Bob Windisch had a connection with Southern Cal. And as long as I live, I have to be grateful to him, because this is a story how I ended up becoming a sports agent. I was at Eastern Michigan University, and I decided I want to give back to the community. So I started working, finding ways to, how am I going to give back? I decided coaching. So I coached Little League baseball. And luckily, I had good friends that was on the Eastern baseball team. And because I was taking so many hours at school that I in lab work, I couldn't go to these tryouts. And a couple guys that I knew that played on the baseball team scouted for me. So they would give me a list of names, and those were the kids we drafted. And I've never seen who they were. And Lord and behold, we ended up pretty good. The first game we won, Robinson, where I lived in Mary Housing, was crying his eyes out. I thought that was tears of joy. So I said, well, are you that happy? He goes, no, Coach. He says, I'm 13 years old, and this is the first game we won. I go, what? And so I called Clyde King up, and I said, what's going on? He goes, we didn't want to tell you. He says, nobody wanted the Angels. He says, that's why it was so easy for you. We not only gave you the head coaching job, but we made you the manager too. So
you can have it all.
Yeah, you can have it all. That's exactly right. And not knowing, and that tells you, there are no accidents. If you've ever seen the movie in Kung Fu Panda, the reason why I said that was, here I am thinking, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, so I'm a St. Louis Cardinal fan. So I'm thinking, I'm talking to Mr. King from the National League. And so Mr. King calls me up and says, we're going to meet at Hobbs in Ypsilanti. I said, oh, okay. So I'm getting ready, and I get another phone call. Is this Mr. King? I go, yes. He goes, we're going to meet at Collegewood, which is right up the road from Mary Housing. I said, well, oh, great. Well, I'm sitting at the meeting. Half an hour later, I go, I'm sorry. I said, I am in the wrong place. I said, I signed up for the National League. He says, too late now. He says, that meeting I'm sure it's over. And he said, you are a no-show. He said, you are a show here for the American League. That's how I end up with the Angels. And
everything happens for a reason. Isn't that so cool?
Yes. And, and it's hard to believe, but all these years, the Angels, I got players that still staying in touch with me. These kids remember, and Brad Haywood, who graduated from Pioneer or Huron, he, it's Coach Ping, and here's a good story for you. Mike Harner, who played on another team, but made the All-Star team, and I ended up being the manager of the All-Star team. The last year I coached there, I only coached twice, 2 years. Mike Harner is a vice assistant to the president at Hillsdale. And Beth and I was sitting there watching after a football game at Hillsdale. We went to a place where you can get some soup and what have you. And I'm sitting there, and Beth says, I think that guy's looking at you. I said, no, I don't think so. I said, there's a TV right above me. I think he's looking at the TV. Lord and behold, Mike Harner comes up and he says, Coach Ping. I go, wow. I said, that's been a long time. He goes, I'll never forget you. He said, you changed my life. And he says, and he was a pilot. And he goes, you changed my life. And he says, I'll never forget what you did for me and what it meant to be coach under you. He said, I learned more baseball in 1 week under you than I did the 3 years I played.
Wow.
And, here's a good story. He says, here's my card if you ever need me. I said to myself, what in the hell am I ever going to need him for? Well, young Casey Schucoat of Saline, I got to know. It was his senior year, and I had no idea it was his last game, too. And he said, I would love for you to come watch me. I said, sure. And so I said, have you gotten any offers? Have you heard? He said, no. He said, real small, maybe Adrian or some other places, I can walk on, what have you. So I called Mike Harner. I said, he said, yes. I said, what can I do for you? I said, well, there's a kid there in Saline. He's a nose tackle, Casey Schucoat, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, no problem. Well, a few years later, I found out the real story. What happened, he went down right to the head coach and say, we need to send somebody to this game Friday night. He goes, we don't have anybody. We don't have anybody to send. He said, all of our people are out scouting. He goes, I didn't ask you. He said, I'm telling you. So he ended up sending his son. And his son came back and said, this kid's pretty good. Well, Casey Schucoat ended up going there on a partial scholarship, worked for Mike Harner, ended up the second year, half a scholarship, his junior, senior, full scholarship. And now he's a medical doctor. And so, these are great things. Well, when I was coaching Little League, the Angels, not knowing that I had one coach, I won't mention his name, came up to me and said, do you realize you had 9 black kids out there at one time? And I looked at him, I goes, no, I think I had 9 angels. And he realized then the conversation stops there. Well, Rodney Holman played on the White Sox, would always come and ride his bike and watch practice. Well, not realizing I had 9 black, I had started counting out of 14 kids, I had 11 black kids. I only had 3 white players. Mm-hmm. David Wallace, Tice, and Brad Haywood. And not realizing that. So Rodney would always come and watch. And one day I said, Rodney, would you like to come and participate? Wow, all the kids said, Coach, he's on the White Sox. I said, I know where he's at. He goes, I said, there's 9 of you. I said, you think one guy's going to beat you? And don't forget this. He ended up practice with us. Well, the second year I coached, we sat down and say, how many games, guys, are we going to lose this year? Not how many games we're going to win. How many games are we going to? None. I said, no, that's not real. Let's go realistic. 1, I said, we're getting close. 2, we're getting there. 3, I said, okay, that's more like it. 3 games. Lord and behold, the first 3 games we played, we lost. So I said, okay. We practiced right across from Mary Housing at this elementary school. And I said, okay, guys, put all your gloves alongside the fence. I said, since you can't catch with them, you don't need them. And there was a tree about a quarter of a mile down on that property. First time I threw a ball, went through. I said, okay, everybody, start running. Well, they go, but he missed it. I said, it affects the whole team. So I was installing in them the Marine Corps mentality. Mm-hmm. All for one, one for all. And so by the end of practice, there wasn't a ball that went through anybody. They were diving for the ball, catching the ball in the air without their gloves. Long story short, I know it's hard to believe, they went 17-3. And that's how I became the manager of the year there. And I was just there about 8-9 years ago at Candy Stain Park in Ypsilanti, and a young black coach came up to me. He says, Coach Ping, I looked at him. He goes, we will never break your record. That year, we won the American League Championship, the National League Championship. We won the All-Star, and we won the Ypsilanti Ann Arbor Press Tournament.
Wow.
And so we just cleaned it all. And I thought that was a good time to leave. So I'm teaching at Eastern. I'm going through school at Eastern, and I end up teaching there, straight out of college. And I'll never forget this. I was in zoology class, and Dr. Booth, it was a big class, 300 kids. And so I ended up somehow with this guy named Ski. Ski and I studied together, and took our first test, and we walked in, and on the blackboard it was 76, 67. Then it dropped all the way down. There's a line that drawn, 20, and then 0. He says, all you people 20 and below, you're not going to make it. Get out of here now. And he said, come up and get your paper. So Ski went up and got his paper, 76. I said, holy shit, got a C+. Well, we didn't know any of this at the time. So I walked up there, and I got my paper, 60-something. And I go, you got a 76? I got a 60. He goes, yeah, and that's the 2 highest in the class right now. And that's when Dr. Booth went up and put all this up, and he goes, okay, is everybody, all you guys below, drop. The next time when we went to class, out of 300 people, just honest God truth, there was probably only about 15 of us left. We were all sitting there, and he was able to walk to each and one of us and said, what do you want? And he asked Ski. Ski says, I like to be like my dad, neurosurgeon. And he goes, what are you going to do? I looked at him and I go, I want to teach here. He goes, that ain't happening. He says, I've been in Michigan State for 8 years. I just got this. And he said, it's hard to get in a university to teach. I didn't realize that he followed me for the next 3 years. And after I graduated my master's, he came up to me and says, congratulations. He said, by golly, you did it. So I was a visiting lecture professor there. And I remember, I was going to Japan studying. And because I got involved in martial arts when I was in Japan. And one year, I was flying back, and it was on a Saturday, Sunday morning, I got a phone call. So we'd like you to come in for an interview. I said, you got the wrong person. He goes, no, we got the right guy. We want you to come in for an interview tomorrow. So I walked. I'm going, okay. So I go in for an interview. There's all kinds of people lined up in the hallway. I'm going, what the heck is all this? So after the interview, I get a phone call from the superintendent. Says, you're the one that Howard Lounsbury wants. I went, oh, okay. So I go and sit in front of the superintendent, He said, well, you're going to come in step one. And he says, this is what and I said, no, I'm sorry. I said, I can't come in step one. He goes, what? I said, I got a job at Eastern. I said, you came and got me, so I want to come in at step 3. He goes, I'm sorry, that can't happen. So I left. I get home, and my wife at the time, well, you got it? I go, no, I turned it down. What do you mean you turned it down? I said, they wanted me to come in at step 1, and I told him, no, I want to step 3. She goes, you have no experience. How in the hell are you going to come in at step 3? The phone rang. Mr. Wilbank calls up, and he goes, come on back. He said, Harold don't want anybody but you. So I end up being there. Well, before all this happened, when I was at Eastern, Rodney Holman, the young man that I allowed practice, he was a senior in 1978, and he came up to me when I was teaching at Eastern. He goes, Coach, I got a question for you. I said, sure. He says, I don't know what school to go to. I said, Rodney, you're a parade All-American tight end. I said, there's no choice. I said, you should be talking to your mom and dad. This is a major decision. He goes, well, Mom and Dad told me to come see you. I said, oh, okay. So I said, your dad being a bricklayer, doing a lot of concrete work, I said, and raising 9 kids, I said, he can't afford to be flying out to California. So I said, knock all those schools out. And I said, you don't want to go to Oklahoma or Nebraska. Back then you could get unlimited amount of scholarship. And he got Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan State, of course. And I told him, you don't want to go to Michigan because they're going to make you a glorified guard. You don't want to go to Ohio State, you'll never see a ball, and you're a tight end. I said, do we have anything from the South? He goes, yes. He says, how about Tulane? I said, that's a great school. Next thing I know, 3 years later, I see the little guy with a baby fro. Coach, I said, Rodney, what are you doing? He says, I made Parade All-American again. I said, well, great. He said, I'm going to play at the East-West Shrine. I'm going to play at the Senior Blue. I'm going to play at the Blue-Gray Bowl. And I'm going to play at it's called the Golden Bowl. And that was the only year that they had it. And the coach for the Washington Redskins, Allen, coached it. And also, that's where he took, at the Senior Bowl, he had a picture with the legendary Coach Bryant. And I got that picture. But he says, you don't hear me. I said, no, I don't hear you. I said, you want to turn pro? He goes, I want you to represent me. I said, Rodney, I said, I don't do that. He says, well, you helped David Purefoy. You helped Jim Peterzak. You helped Ron Johnson. You helped Ted Hand. I go, yeah, I helped. He goes, you can do it. I want you to give up. And so I gave up my assistant principal position at East Middle School. And that's how I became a sports agent.
That's so cool. So the highlight in listening to you, one, I mean, I'm a big believer that people are our greatest resources. In the fact of the matter that you remember everybody's name. You talk about everybody's names, but you coached for 2 years, and you've had these relationships that have lasted you this lifetime to where you can call up and connect other people and get them, out of their opportunities. And that's just, it's so incredible to be a steward of those relationships.
Well, I think if you truly treat people with respect and you guide them in a proper way, and they remember that. And it's not always, buying things for them, doing things for them. It's allowing them to understand the consequences, that when they make a choice, they gotta stay with it. And that's what I think the value came into a lot of these young men. And I remember one of them lived in Ypsilanti. I after practice, I said, Herbie, where you going? He goes, I'm going to go home. I said, what's for dinner? He goes, I don't know. He says, Mom's at work. He said, maybe some popcorn. I said, popcorn? I said, And I lived in Maryhausen. I said, you know what? I'm having hot dogs tonight. Come on, you stay here. So, you got to lend a helping hand when you know they're in need. And those kids don't forget it. And that's why I think after all these years, I still have, to my testimonial part in the book, those young men, voice their opinions and their thoughts.
Oh, I'm at the gym crying. Like, by the way, it's beautiful to hear that. But how much do you think you growing up in the people that came into your life and made a difference, good, bad, and indifferent, plays into how you've lived your life, really mentoring and developing people?
That's hard that really is hard to answer, because it's very difficult to understand yourself.
Yeah.
At what point, what caused you to do what you do? When I went in the Marine Corps, the reason why I survived is I fought. And I remember fighting, when you were little. I fought when I was my sister used to say if I stayed in Taiwan, I would probably been a little gangster, because I was a leader even back then. I had my own little group of kids that we go do things, and we were the kids that got in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And my sister used to say, she would be so embarrassed because every day she hear the principal yelling for my name to come to the principal's office. And thank goodness they don't do that in the United States, Put your name on a loudspeaker and say, get over here, John Doe, you're screwed up again. But I think what's important to me is that looking back, if I could, what helped me was going through the hardship and made me what I am, because I just felt that I just could not be put down. I just would not allow, even in the Marine Corps, when Valdez says, you're not going to be this, or yet had no problem using me for the betterment of the platoon 152, and it was just things like that inspired me to keep going, because the men surrounded me.
And I feel like with one door shut, another door opened.
Yes, without a doubt. Colonel Van Zuen, and when I was stationed in Yokosuka, Japan, said to me, he said, Sergeant Ping, when's the last time you saw your parents? I said, 11 years ago. He goes, 11 years ago? I said, yes, sir. He goes, go to Building 10, find Lieutenant Commander, and she will put you on a military hop. You're going to go see your mom and dad. That was probably the very important part of my life. And when I went to see my mom and dad, it changed everything. And so in 1976, I was able to bring them all here to the United States, and they live out their life here. And I'm sure my mom and dad was very grateful for all that.
That's so how much joy is that for your mom and dad? And I remember in the book you going back home for that first time and them seeing you. Your mom, you said you're 4'3" versus coming home a grown man. How much happiness was there when you moved them over?
It's a strange thing in the respect that for 11 years you haven't seen your mom and dad. You left crying every day.
Yeah.
And but my mom, you can just imagine looking at a child that's maybe 4'3", so you're still looking down, and then all of a sudden, a young man standing at 5'10", it's almost like, wow, what happened here? And so it was quite traumatic, yes. And I remember leaving as a child at 9. I can remember my mom was so devastating that she literally took me everywhere. She went to the bathroom, she dragged me in there. So I had to stand there. And I'll never forget all of that, because and my mom really never forgave my dad for that, because life robbed her 10 years of her child growing up.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So it was tough.
Yeah, I'm picturing that as a father myself. That thinking about sending your child over and thinking about you every day, and this is not in the times of social media where you can just check in and see how you're doing. So it's just got to be hard.
Well, here's something that may trigger some thoughts in some of the people who are listening is that you come here speaking Chinese and no English. And as you write and as you start to adopt yourself to a new life in a new world, you soon forget the language that you have that you were born with, and you have to learn a new language. And the new language would force you to forget your old language, because if you want to survive in this country, you've got to learn English.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw a special the other day with Jackie Chan when he was on a talk show and says, "How did you learn English?" And I had to smile because it's exactly the way I learn English. I know a lot of people don't understand, but Motown was inspirational to me. And Tina Turner Tina was my favorite. All of her song that she sang, the Four Tops, The Temptation, Mary Wells, all of that. I'll just never forget it because that's how I learned my English, plus some good old country. And I think that's why, because when people talk to me, they kind of like, "Were you born here?" Well, no. They says, "Well, you don't have an accent." I said, "Well, it's hard to have an accent when you've been introduced to Motown and the country singers, So back then it was called shit kickers. It wasn't country. It wasn't country music, Here's something that would be enjoyable to the listener. I was coming through from Canada to the United States, and you have to go through custom on at the bridge there, and the custom officer looked at me and goes, "What's that music you got on?" I said, "Oh, it's shit kickers." He goes, I said, "Where'd you learn that word?" I said, "The Marine Corps." He goes, "Have a good day." He didn't ask another question. And after that, every time when he saw me, he just waved me by.
So, through this, when all the stories, the near death, I think of when you're when you're getting in the Jeep and the bullet holes through the window, and the guy sitting next to you, the last person driving was killed. All these near death experiences, everything you went through. So many people would blame those circumstances for the reason why that they're a horrible human.
Absolutely. You can understand why.
Absolutely. You can absolutely understand why.
When we first got to Vietnam, I'll never forget, I was on my way to Dang Ha on a chopper. And it's amazing to me now that I look back at the advancements of technology. But back then there was a big tent, and the computer was probably the size of that whole tent, and now computer size of a 5x8,
Yeah.
So, but I'll never forget. There was two Marines going back home, and I looked at him. I said, "Where you guys going?" He says, "Going home." I said, "What the heck's out there?" He goes, "Oh, that's called Happy Valley." He said, "You don't want to go out there." He says, "They're fighting all the time out there." I said, "Well, we won't have to worry about that," because I said, "We're going up to Dang Ha." And just as he said that, I'm getting ready to get on the chopper. My buddy and I we're walking towards the chopper with my sea bag, and all of a sudden I got called back. He said, "You're not going." I said, "What happened?" He said, "They changed your order." I said, "What do you mean change my order?" He goes, they got a riot going on at the Da Nang Brig, and you've got a corrections degree." And he says, "They need you out there." I said, "Well, where in the heck is it?" He goes, "Right there." I said, that's Happy Valley. He says, oh, you've been there? I said, no. I said, those two guys told me not to go there. He said, well, you got a driver coming to pick you up. This Jeep comes to pick me up. I get in the Jeep. I look out the window, and all of a sudden, I realize there's a bullet hole. I mean, dead in. I moved to the right. It was sitting there. I moved to the left. It's still there. And the driver says, yeah, he's dead. And I looked at him. He said, I was driving. And he said, the sniper just hit him dead in the heart. And it killed him. And I said, oh, thank you. I get there to Vietnam. I get there at my duty station, the Da Nang Brig area, which is in charge of POW, Brig, and also the Highway 1. They were also in charge of all the scout dogs in the whole area, in the I Corps up in the DMZ. And I'm just barely checked in. The lieutenant calls me and he goes, I see you have a demolition MOX. I said, yeah, that's a year ago. I said, I haven't touched a demolition. He said, well, you got more experience than anybody else. He said, you're going to have to go out there and you're going to have to lay out 18 Claymore mines. I go, what? He goes, that's right. He said, so get ready. I said, I don't even know what the terrain looked like. He said, well, you'll find out real fast. So I'm crawling on my belly and I'm going out there and I'm setting up 18 Claymore mines. And after I set them, I come back. And but before we went out there, one of the Marines said to me, he says, I said, how we're going to find out, who to shoot? Because I'm Asian. And I said,
valid question.
So I said, well, let me tell you this. Shoot the one that's in second, because I won't be first. I'm going to be running in here. I said, so whoever's chasing me, you can hit him. I said, because I will not be chasing after anybody. So he goes, okay. But luckily, no problem there. But, talking about Tet and maneuvers, and you block a lot of these things out. And there was a young Marine named Ivy from Mississippi who knew, he to be with a black man. Are you kidding me? That, like he told me, he said, we burned crosses on their lawn. And I said, Ivy, those days are gone. I said, that's many years ago, buddy. I said, you're going to be in there with this Marine. And he goes, and Lord and behold, by the time we left, that was his best friend. And but Ivy, Ivy, we were on a maneuver, and he goes, I'm shot. I said, shut up. I said, you're not shot. He goes, I'm shot. He said, there's something warm running down my leg. I said, it's called shit. He goes, no. He says, it's really. I said, oh, shit. So I'm crawling. I'm belly crawling all the way up to him. And I put my hand right in his pants, and I feel this. I said, then I put it next to my nose because it was so black you couldn't see. I said, well, it don't smell. I said, so I know you didn't take a shit. I said, so. And then all of a sudden it started getting real tacky. That's when I realized it was blood. So I took out my K-bar and I stuck it, and I heard a ding. I said, oh, I got it. Surgically, I removed that bullet from his butt. And because of that, he did not get a Purple Heart. Because in Vietnam, back then, you have to be medevac. Now, you get a scratch, you get a Purple Heart. So it's quite a big difference in just, 40 years.
He's like, you should have kept the bullet in.
That's exactly right. That is so true. But that's like me losing a toenail. The siren came on, and I rush out and because grab my rifle. We know where we're going, and another Marine was rushing in, and boy, his boot caught my toenail, ripped it straight up at a 90 degree, and man, did that hurt. And as soon as I went out there and I dove on the ground, and all of a sudden I looked down in the sand. It was like a blood running down, and he looked at me and goes, they didn't overrun us. He says, I can't stand it being here anymore. He says, I got to get out of here. He literally took an M16 and blew his kneecap and all of his calf right off his leg. And when men get desperate over there, you just never know at what degree they will do to get out of there. So,
well, and I love that when you going fast forwarding back to being an NFL agent, and you were talking about negotiating contracts or negotiating with an NFL team and the gravity of that versus the experiences you've had, through the Marines, through your childhood.
Absolutely. When I gave up, being an educator, I never taught high school or junior high school, and besides student teaching, I never taught at any of that level. I was an administrator, and then negotiating a contract, it was quite unique. My first contract I negotiated with Rodney ended up being a third-round draft choice of the Cincinnati Bengals, and I earned because Mike was Mike Brown, who is now the sole owner because his brother Pete passed away, and Paul Brown, the engineer of the Cincinnati Bengal and a beautiful coach of the Cleveland Brown, I got a chance to meet, and who signed an autographed book for me. I'll never forget, long as I live, Mike Brown must have, taken everything to his dad and talked to him, because his dad knew a lot about me, and yet I never, negotiated, of course, with his dad. But I'll never forget that negotiating Rodney's contract. I was talking to Mike Brown, and he was so frustrated. I heard a bang, and Rodney go, "What happened?" I said, "Oh, he hung up." He hung up. I said, "Yeah, he'll get over it." Well, within 2 weeks, he called back. He says, "You act like this kid's going to be an all-pro." I said, "Coach, I know a lot about him. I know his integrity. I know his work ethics." I said, "He's not a normal kid." Well, Lord and behold, within 4 years, he was an all-pro tight end.
Yeah.
And when I had to, every 4 years, 3 years, I would renegotiate the contract. So I had to go down to Cincinnati. And one day, Paul Brown walked by and he said, "Doc Ping," he says, "you want to come by my office when you're done?" I said, "Yes, sir. I'd love to." And Mike was kind of surprised. And when I finished negotiating, he told me where to go, and I walked down there. And Paul Brown, we sat down, we talked a little bit, and they had this big tiger. Somebody sent him, because the Bengal tiger, they sent him this beautiful rug. He goes, every time, he says, I have these people come in for save the animals and everything. He says, I put it behind the couch. He says, this way nobody can say anything about it. And he says, by the way, he says, I got a book out. He says, would you like to have one? I said, yes, sir, I would. He says, would you like me to sign it? I said, absolutely. So in my office in my house, it's one of the only books that I have that I take a lot of pride in. And Paul Brown personally gave it to me.
So much history. That's so cool.
And Representative Rodney really got me steamrolled. And he the year after that, we ended up with Lionel Washington. The year after that, we ended up with Robert Lyles and Mark Goralichek from Western Michigan, and on and on. I mean, from the Barry Stokes, the Craig Sowers, Ed Hawthorns. I mean, Patrick Cunningham, Texas A&M, and I mean, just on TCU was just a hotbed. Tulane was a hotbed. We represented quite a bit. Sean Thomas, who was a second-round draft choice. Isaac Holt out of Alcorn State, and I got a lot of players from Bethune-Cookman. Here's a good story. Larry Little, not many people know who he is, but Larry Little is an all-pro guard for the Miami Dolphins, one of the few men left that was on that undefeated season.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, and Larry Little ended up coaching at Bethune-Cookman. And Larry Little asked me he says, I'd like to talk to you before I want you to represent any players from Bethune-Cookman. And I said, sure. So I was down there, and I walked in, and he says, how many white players you have? I go, what? He goes, how many white players do you have? I said, well, let me see. Mark Ralchak, Barry Stokes. And he goes, okay. He said, that's all I wanted to know. I said, Coach, I said, that's a strange question. He goes, he says, a lot of these black athletes are bought. And he says, agents come in here knowing that they're poor. So he said, they entice them. And he says, not knowing that they're not good people, but being bought.
Yeah.
So I always tell the players, I said, just remember, don't be a prostitute. Don't sell yourself. I said, you're good. Just hold back. I said, you've done it for 4 years in college, you had nothing. Why all of a sudden now you need everything? I said, just be patient. I said, draft's coming. I said, after the draft, you buy your own. You don't owe anybody anything. So, and that's important to me. Integrity. I said, your character is everything. Exactly. If you don't have that, honestly, you don't have anything. So that's important.
So true. And it's a separator. You look at what you've done as an agent, and it's combining the development of people, and we've even talked about the martial arts and all that piece yet. But there's so much that you're pouring into people outside of the negotiations. You're helping people become men.
Well, at least you try. You try to install integrity in them, and it's extremely important. I'll give you this one story. I won't mention any names. The player played at Alcorn and was getting money for 3 years, and I was representing his best friend, and I call him Little Moon, and I was down there. I'll never forget this. I was down there. He said, do you mind if a couple of friends come over and eat with us? I said, of course not. So we were eating at, it's a soul food place down there. And I'll never forget, we were talking and what have you. It was 4 or 5 guys there. And we afterwards, it was Friday night, game was on Saturday, and we go out, and the newspaper a stand was right there, and you put a quarter in, and you pull it out, and you get the newspaper. And he took, 4 or 5. I said, what are you doing? He says, get the newspaper. I said, you only pay for one. I said, he goes, he looked at me and goes, you're right. I said, that's right. I said, somebody's got to pay for that. And not knowing that meant anything. Well, Lord and behold, I get a phone call from his best friend. And he said, what you did, he said, impressed me. He says, how do I get out of a contract with another agent? And I said, what? He goes, yeah. And I recognized who he was. And he says, this agent's been paying me $5,000 every year. He says, I had nothing. He says, but I get the money, I give it to Mom. So, long story short, he ended up being the 2nd round draft choice of the Minnesota Viking. And we paid the agent back. I told him, I said, you write a letter terminating the relationship. I said, and let him know we will pay him back. And that's exactly what happened. There are so many stories to be told that on that side. There's that's what's happening right now. People buying players, and it's a shame. It's a real shame. But it's a dog eat dog world business, because they make the money when they can and sell them. It's and there's no real commitment to them, because I bought them, so there's no loyalty.
Yeah.
So that's sad.
It's like almost a slave. You own them.
Yeah.
That's really sad. But it's a differentiator. And I said this at the beginning, and you talked about integrity a second ago. But I felt like through listening to your book, it's the hard work. It's obviously the mindset, because again, so many people would live through the experiences that you've been through and blame that for the reasons why they're miserable or horrible humans, right? That's not the path that you decided. But that integrity piece, the things that you're doing when no one else is maybe even looking is what creates those opportunities, because it came about like even the assistant principal job, right? You just somebody, you didn't apply for that job. It just came out of the blue, and that principal wanted you, didn't want anyone else, to where you could go in and demand stage 3 having no experience. But it comes down to who you represent yourself as, even when no one's looking.
Well, I think coaching Little League, people in the community saw, that working with kids. Where I got that start, believe it or not, was in Yokosuka, Japan. Colonel Harrison, they need a coach to coach Little League baseball. And so I volunteered. And where most men would rather go out to the bar, enjoy themselves when their time off, I work with kids. And I never forget, Sergeant Major one day needed somebody to golf against another base, and wanted me to go golf, and because he knew in some conversation that I made money going through high school, working as a shagging balls at Forest Park in Missouri, and so Sergeant Major said, "You will be golfing. You will be at the golf course." Blah 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 blah. Well, I told Sergeant Major, I can't. I have a commitment to coach Little League baseball. I got these kids. Well, little did I know, he was talking so doggone loud that Colonel Harrison heard it. Came out and says, he will be coaching. He said he made a commitment to these kids, and so there will be no golfing for him. But and he told you already, Sergeant Major, that he did not want to go golfing. He wanted to coach the Little League, and that's how I got my start, coaching those little kids. And then from there, when I came back to United States after Vietnam, I felt that I could do that for the community, give back, and we're still giving back. For example, I was just thinking this morning, 33 years now, the Pings Athletic Scholarship, we've been giving back to Saline. We started off giving some to Ypsilanti, but for some reason they fell out. Maybe being from Saline, the counselor didn't, wasn't fired up to help tell these kids to apply for it. So we end up not doing any more for Ypsilanti, but Saline's been going on for 33 years. Wow. It's a boy and a girl every year get a scholarship for academic athletic, because you can be an academic student as far as I feel, but to be an athlete in an academic environment, that's hard. Mm-hmm. To be doing two things. So this scholarship we've been given 2 years. So it's been over 60 young men and ladies have received a scholarship. That's so cool. Over 1,000 every year for the last 33 years.
Wow, that's so cool to give back like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't look at it as anything. I really don't, because I don't even think about it. It's something. You just do it. I don't think you ever do anything. If you do something that you're looking for a reward, then you didn't do it.
Yep. Yep.
It's not to satisfy your soul. It's to satisfy your ego.
I always say it's like you go and do good things for people, and life will take care of you. It's not knocking on your door and saying, "Remember that good thing I did for you." It's just going out and doing good things for people.
Well, that's exactly right. Many times life has a lot of ups and downs, and I haven't touched anything about my martial arts. I have wonderful, dedicated students that was been with me since 1974, and the loyalty. Coach Hollis, who coached at Huron, is one of my senior students, and now I have another student from Huron, Stuart, a young Foster. His mother started in the dojo, and Mr. Leach, who's national regarded as one of the best orchestra band leader in the United States. These are my instructors, but Coach Hollis he's the number one. He's been with me since 1974, and and you don't think about it, but when you have somebody that's been with you that long, you've done something right. And the loyalty, you don't buy that, you earn it.
Absolutely.
And, so I just happen to be, Jishu Kanru Jiu-Jitsu is the art that I study, and that's what I taught hand-to-hand combat to the 28th Marine, 5th Marine Division. And the first night I walk into that riot in the break, in going back to Vietnam, I'll never forget that. I heard this voice saying, "Hey, that's our hand-to-hand combat instructor." I said, "Oh shit! All these guys that I've been teaching are in Brig. They're in here." So, and this is a true story that every time I came on, they were just beautiful prisoners. Every time I got off, they were riot. And I never forget when Captain Dexter says, "I don't know what the hell's going on, but he can't go on like this. He's going to be dead." He's got work. He's working in the brig here. He's got night patrol. He's got reconnaissance. I said, he can't do all this shit. He's going to be dead before.
Like they weren't letting you go home because they didn't want the prisoners to riot.
That's so true. But the greatest compliment I had that was the two things that I do want to bring up that I may never get a reward for it, but in my heart I did. I was making a call and had to go back to FL, Force Logistic Command, FLC. And on the way back, we went through a village, and Omama-san came out with a package of 2 big packages, 300 roll marijuanas. She says, "Hancho, you take this back to your Marine, huh? And they can enjoy it." I said, "Well, thank you." And just as she was saying that, I looked over her shoulder, and I see the village back there, and I see this thing lift up, spider trap. That's where all the Viet Cong hides. And I looked at that, and I said, "I'll be damned." So we went around the mountain, and I took my K-bar out, and cut all the rolled up marijuana, and I threw it into the rice paddy. And when we got back there, and I went to see the captain, I said, "Listen," I said, "that village back there, I saw a spider trap. I think the Viet Congs are in there. They happen to be behind us, and because we got the Happy Valley in front that could come through, and they're coming working their way in on the tunnel behind us." And he says, you made a mistake." He said, "Don't worry about it." I said, "Okay." I just reporting what I saw. Well, half an hour later, it got to him. He goes, pulled me back in. He said, "Are you willing to put your rank on the line?" I said, "Yes, sir." I said, "I can only report what I saw." Well, the Force Recon, sent in choppers. Must have been, I don't know, 6 choppers. Surrounded that village. We could hear the choppers coming around. They confiscated 200 rounds and caught 100 Viet Congs without firing a shot. That is something I can live with the rest of my life.
Wow.
And one night, in the brig, I got tired of bringing one hut in, feeding them, taking back, bring another hut in, bring them back. I brought them all out, about 150 prisoners. And this one prisoner, he was the king rat there. We had him, everybody's lined up, and he come walking up. He goes, I said, the line's in the back. He goes, "I don't go in the back of the line." I said, "You will." He says, "Who's going to make me?" I said, "I am." He says, "And how are you going to do that?" I said, "Because I have your balls in my hand." And he looked at me, and I said, "If you make one move, I'm going to act like I'm going to pass out, and I'm going to yank it out." And, to this day, I kind of wonder myself, how in the heck my hand was that soft that he didn't have any idea I had.
When I was listening in the book, I'm like, how did he not know?
I said, but I walked him back, and that was so he was way ahead of Jackson 5 in the moonwalking. He walked backwards.
He
Like
probably had a high-pitched voice like Michael Jackson, too, I bet.
he was, it was unbelievable. That broke it because now all of a sudden the prisoner realized he's not as tough as we thought he was. And when I was marching them right out there, and all the different posts up there around the brig, they had the lock and load because we've never had 150 prisoners all out in one time. And but I wasn't worried, and marched them through the chow hall, and happened to be the same night. Ended up being, I forgot, General Smith. One of the generals came in for an inspection, a surprise inspection. And he looked right at me. He goes, "Of all the wars I have been in," he said, "this is the most well-run brig I have ever been to." And that's when the gunny said to me, he said, "You know, you're going to get a medal for this." He says, "I just want you to know." Well, that was just before Tet, and Sergeant Porter, who was our S4 guy, wanted to see battle. He had to see. He was, because he worked in the office. He was never going to be out there in the battlefield. Well, when we got overrun, everybody had to come out, and not everybody is mentally ready for battles, and it messed him up so bad that I walked into the office one day, and it was just a little hut, but he was in there in a corner, in a fetal position, crying, saying, "They're everywhere. They're around me." And that's when I realized that. So I had to ask for him to be removed, and we moved him out of there. And so some of those records were never written. But these things happen, and you're in a war situation, and just like during Tet. This Marine came up to me and said, "Well, you got to sign this so that your wife get paid." I said, "You were just here." I said, "You made a mistake." He said, "No, that was 30 days ago." So when you're in a war, you don't count days, and you don't know time. One day run into another, 30-day pass, and I had no idea. No idea. So.
Wow. You think about how time can fly by anyways, but being in war, you don't really, I would never even fathom that.
Well, every night when all you do is see trace around. What people don't realize is you see, for every trace around you're seeing, there could be anywhere from 50 to 60 to 100 round in between. And yet, when you look at the trace around going out there hitting, they were just one line, one solid red line coming up, going across. And when we call them Puff the Magic Dragon, and they just, and firing right out. And we were out night maneuver one day, and Captain Dexter said we were doing something, and all of a sudden this chopper up there just fired around. Boy, everybody dove and went right over us. And Captain Dexter says, "What the hell you think? Sorry. Get out of here before we blow you out of here. We don't need your support." So they left. I'll never forget that. I mean, it was close. And when they fire a burst around, supposedly 100 yards on a football field, a mouse cannot run from one end to the other without getting hit. So every inch of that football field is covered by a bullet. That's when they burst. When they open up a burst, it sprays.
Insane. Doc, I could sit here and talk to you for 4 hours. This is just incredible. I've thoroughly enjoyed hearing your stories, and thank you so much for coming out.
Well, thank you for having me. Really.
My pleasure. I've had this date on the calendar for a little over a month now, and I've been looking forward to it ever since. For those listening, what's really cool is, we've had a long conversation here, but there's so much that we still have not covered from the book. I highly recommend it. There's a lot from your sports and in martial arts that we have not dove into. There's so much there. I highly recommend going and getting the book. I'm getting the paperback next. I had to listen to it on Audible here before you come on, but I couldn't recommend the book high enough. Like I said, I have a whole story about eating faces, but to spare you of it, it's just surviving in spite of the circumstances. There are things that are happening around us, or there are things that we can't control. And what do you make out of that? In Doc, you've built an incredible life and most importantly, an incredible legacy that has impacted so many people that it's just, it's a great honor to have you in the studio with me.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and just like I said before, that when you're trying to do the right thing and be a good person, do it without thoughts. You just do things. For example, when Beth and I are in Vegas, as an example, and we went to Chinatown and got something to eat, and on the way back, I saw a man without any legs, a veteran, and wheeling himself around. And I just jumped out of the car, gave him all of the leftover that we were going to go take home to eat. Here, enjoy the food tonight. I said, there's some good stuff. And he looked at me and goes, thank you so much. I said, no, not a problem. And you don't think, you don't pat yourself on the back. Just do it. Just be the best that you can be and be as honest as you can be. And that's all I think anybody can ever ask for. And good things will happen.
Mic drop moment. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Go Lions.
Absolutely. Absolutely.